Hello everyone and welcome to another video. As we all know, capitalism is the best thing to ever happen to society, and the only legitimate goal in life is to become as rich as possible. That is why today I am going to figure out what the fastest way is to become a millionaire in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2. Now, obviously you could just make a custom scenario where you start out with €1,000,000, but that doesn't make for a very good video, so instead we're going to stick to the official scenarios only. Before we go and optimize stuff, I want to see in which scenario you become a millionaire the quickest if you don't do anything. I thought this would just be a quick, short, funny start of the video, but it's actually fairly difficult to find which scenario is the most profitable long term. Firstly, any scenario that charges for the park entrance is right out. Take Six Flags Magic Mountain. It has a very high entry fee of €45, but it starts out with so many guests that you very quickly reach the soft guest cap, which means that there are more guests in your park than your rides attract. At this point, the guest spawning rate cuts in 4, severely reducing your park entry income, making it impossible to make a profit. That leaves scenarios where you charge for the ride, and I had a look at a few of these that have a very big park already there. First up, I tried Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which despite the over €3,000 of interest a month from the €2,000,000 loan, can make a decent profit. The problem here is that the park cannot properly run itself, and it will eventually run into issues with litter, leading to a low park rating, which means that no new guests spawn as old ones are slowly leaving, and therefore the income goes down. Alright then, what about Paradise Pier 2? It's got a decent park already going, so it could work. We start off by making a really nice profit with sometimes even $1,000 a month, but after 13 years guests suddenly do not want to ride on any of the rides anymore. That's because they've now lowered too much in value as they've gotten too old. That's not a problem though, as once the rides turn 25 years old they increase in value again as they're now considered a monument, so guests do want to pay again and we make a profit once more. This works great, and by year 50 we already have nearly €100,000 in the bank. But then, suddenly, in year 79, our income completely stops. I was baffled by this because it makes no sense, but then I realized that all the rides were broken down and it dawned on me. Our only mechanic has drowned. You see, there's this tiny chance that when a mechanic goes into a ride or exit it, they fall through the path. That's not a problem if it's on land, but if it's on water that means that they unfortunately will not live to see another day. So Paradise Pier 2 is also not our answer. Before we try to get rich in another scenario, I have to get richer in real life by thanking the sponsor of this video. Displate! Displate makes premium metal posters that are a very durable alternative to the more standard paper or canvas ones. They are very easy to install as they use magnets that attach to your wall. So there's no need to put a hole in the wall or something. The magnets also mean that if, while watching me drown some guests for example, you notice that Avatar Aang is a bit wonky, you can very easily adjust it to align with the other stuff on your wall. There are many different varieties available, like this one from Lord of the Rings, or this one from Avatar, or just some pretty nature. And of course there's many more, with over 200 licensed designs and over 40,000 from independent artists. To get your own display, you can go to display.com or scan this QR code and use code Marcel at checkout to get 22 to 33% off your order. Thanks again to Displate and my brother's lovely cat, Bento, for sponsoring this video. After the failure of Paradise Pier 2, I switched to Diamond Heights. Here too you have a pretty good park already going with a number of rides that you charge for. And most importantly, not a single ride exit is above water, so no mechanic can drown. What can of course happen is a ride crash, which is something that agoraphobia and claustrophobia are very infamous for. In fact, because I pressed the speed up button before I pressed the record button, agoraphobia crashed before I even started recording. I can show you the crash of claustrophobia though, which happened in year 53. At this point we're at a respectable €278,000, but with the second crash we are now missing our two biggest revenue sources, significantly lowering our profit. It takes another 165 years to not even double that and reach $500,000. And then it takes another 380 years before we reach the big 7-digit number of 1 million in the year 600. This proves that you can technically become a millionaire in this game without doing anything. It just takes a few weeks in real life if you don't have any speed up tools. I did a few more attempts, and while I did get to year 10 without a crash a few times, it seems that claustrophobia not crashing until year 53 was insanely lucky, so I did not beat my first attempt. Can we do better though? I tried Crumbly Woods, but the average profit was lower, so that wasn't gonna beat it. Then I tried Mel's World and it was going quite well with potentially a faster time until we again lost our mechanic. There are no water exits here though, so what happened? Well, the launched freefall has an underground exit, so our dear old mechanic fell into the void, which means he doesn't even get a notification to let the world know he's no longer with us. Next up was White Water Park, but I failed to realize that the boat hire has a water exit, so yeah, you already know what happened. Katie's Dreamland is a different story though. It does have a boat hire, but its exit is on land, so the mechanic is safe. The profit is not as good as it was in Diamond Heights, and after 53 years, where in Diamond Heights we already had 270,000, Katie's Dreamland sits at a mere 80,000 in the bank. However, after this point, the profit slowed down tremendously in Diamond Heights, as both big coasters had crashed. We did also lose the Storm here in Katie's Dreamland very early on, but that still leaves us with more profit from the uncrashed rides. We actually reached the halfway point of 500,000 only 8 years later than we did in Diamond Heights, year 228 versus year 220. After that we quickly surpassed it and reached €1,000,000 in the bank at the very end of year 451. That's only 3/4 of the time of Diamond Heights, a very significant improvement. It's also the fastest I've been able to do it. No other park seems to be as future-proof in terms of profit as Katie's Dreamland. Fun fact, while doing more attempts to see whether it could be faster than 451 years, I realized that there totally is an underground exit here and we lost the mechanic to that, so I guess I was again very lucky on my first attempt. That's enough faffing about though, let's actually try to get super rich super quick by going from hundreds of years down to single digits. First we'll see how fast we can do it with park entrance tickets and then we'll beat that time with ride tickets. To make the most money possible from the park entry, we need to know in which scenarios the guests are the richest. In Blackpool Pleasure Beach, Sherwood Forest and Icarus Park they spawn with 90 to 120 euros, the highest of all. That's not of any use to us though, as all of these three only allow guests to pay for the rides. The next level down is 80 to 110 euros, which is present in 5 scenarios, of which 2 allow you to charge for the park entry, Harmonic Hills and Adrenaline Heights. Since I'm not particularly excited about dealing with the unholy trifecta of no tree removal, no land changing and no high construction, that only leaves Adrenaline Heights. So, what is the strategy? The basics are really quite simple. We immediately charge 80 euros for the entrance, run all advertisements and also maximize the natural guest spawning. The ads are not very complicated. We need a food or drink store to advertise, we need a ride to advertise, and since we technically do have the ability to charge for rides, we can also make use of the free ride ad campaign. We won't be making any money from the rides, but by charging a bit for one of the rides and advertising it, we will get extra guests from that ride campaign that pay for the entrance. The only campaign that we're not running is the free park entry one, because that makes us no money. Then comes the more complicated part, optimizing the natural guest generation. This includes several factors that all work together. Firstly, the park rating needs to be at least 850, which is easy enough and will come naturally as long as we keep the guests happy. Then we also need to have a soft guest cap that's high enough, so we'll quickly build some rides by abusing the pause button. If we quickly unpause, click and repause, then we can build many rides in an extremely short amount of game time. Then I figured we need some way to get rid of the guests. It's gonna take well over 10,000 guests to make all the money we need, and properly accommodating them is gonna be expensive, so instead I'll build a ride and drop them into the void. We cannot use a maze as guests prefer more intense rides in this scenario, so we'll use a free transport ride and give it a void exit. And now it's time to start optimizing for awards. Every positive award that is active increases the amount of guests that spawn from natural guest generation by 25%, so we always want as many awards active as possible. We've already got the 10 gentle rides for that award in the form of mazes, and we can also quickly build 6 small river rapids for the best water rides award. By making them bright green, we also qualify for the most dazzling color scheme award. Some scenery around the park entry will qualify us for the most beautiful park award, and we are already qualified for the safest park award. In the second half of March I realized that one train ride is not enough to get rid of all the guests, and if we don't do anything we're gonna run into overcrowding issues. But actually, what if we just lock everyone on the first tile? They only check for overcrowding when they enter a new tile, so that won't be a problem then, and with one cheap entertainer they will stay happy forever. They might leave if they're broke or cannot find a ride, but even if they don't leave, that's still fine. Mazes are an incredibly cheap way to increase the soft guest cap, so storing thousands of guests is not gonna cost us all that much money. When April rolls around, we do not get an award, and that is a problem. You can get an award at the start of every month, but which one is selected is completely random, and it could even be a negative one that you don't want anyway. To combat this luck-based system, we're gonna do some RNG manipulation. We reload the save from a few days before April, build some rides to move the random number generator along, and hope that the different random number we now get for the award selection does get us one we qualify for. And it does, we get the award for Best Toilets, which is a well-deserved award as we do have professional butt cleaners waiting to help you out. I mean, the guests cannot reach the toilets, but if they could, they would have the experience of a lifetime. In April, we built 6 custom designed coasters with at least 5.5 excitement in order to qualify for the Best Custom Designed Rides award, and this automatically also qualifies us for the Best Roller Coasters award. With that, we're done qualifying for awards, and now all that rests us to do is increasing the soft guest cap as necessary, keeping the ads running, and making sure we get an award every single month. For May, we do need to re-roll, but after a bit of RNG manipulation, we get the award for Best Gentle Rides. Later in May, it starts to rain for the very first time, and now it's a pretty good thing that the guests are staying around. I'm selling everyone maps for $2 from the info kiosk, and I have priced the umbrellas at $18. Not the maximum of 20, because now the guest that spawned with 100 can still afford the umbrella after the €80 entry fee and a €2 map. When the rain officially starts, everyone buys an overpriced umbrella, and in a matter of mere seconds we make €10,000 profit. That is not insignificant, as that's already 1% of the 1 million goal, and this is only one rain event, it will happen again. At the start of June, after a bit of finagling, we get the award for Best Value Park, and July gives us the Best Custom Designed Rides. We now have 4 awards available, which is the maximum possible. This gives us the highest possible natural guest generation speed, and combined with all the advertisements that we have running, this is more than 700 guests per month on average. That is completely insane and will make us tons of money. It seems that we somehow didn't get the full benefit of this yet in July, but in August we made €54,000 profit from the park entry. That's just pure madness. It's good madness, but it's madness nonetheless. We did not have to worry about getting another award at the start of August, as awards stay active for 5 months. So if you get an award 4 months in a row, then they will stay active together for 1 extra month before the first one disappears. So in September and October we do need to get a new award, and while there is some RNG manipulation necessary, it does go quite smoothly. At this point I have also started selling some food to make a bit of extra cash. Not everyone is hungry, but a few of the older guests are, and they will happily buy expensive cotton candy. I also keep building more toilets to keep qualifying for the Best Toilets award, and more mazes to keep up with the soft guest cap, as we do now have more than 1500 guests in the park. At the end of year 1 we already have more than €350,000 in the bank, which is an awful lot and shows you that if you're doing well with awards you can make a lot of money in paper entry parks. May of year 2 was absolutely awful because I just couldn't get an award. I reset it and did different amount of RNG manipulation over and over again and never got an award. It wasn't until I had been at it for about 30 minutes that I finally took a look at the actual award window instead of just checking for a notification, and noticed that none of them disappeared. I completely failed to realize that we are now in the second round of them staying around together for another month, so we can't get the new one. Yeah, sometimes I'm really not the smartest person around. After that colossal waste of time, we quickly move on, and by the end of year 2 we have about €800,000 in the bank, making year 2 more profitable than year 1. We need just a few more months, and at the beginning of June it's time to delete everything for some extra money, and on June 4th, year 3, we reach the holy grail of €1 million in the bank. That is honestly faster than I expected, but it's not fast enough. This was my very first run and I definitely did not play optimally, so let's do that again, but better. The second run was faster already, but it still wasn't perfect, so I did a third run and this one was really good. There are quite a few improvements that I've made. Firstly, I realized that keeping guests around as long as possible so that they can buy a map, food, drinks, and if it rains an umbrella is a significantly better strategy than expunging them as soon as possible. And we can charge a ton for this stuff. If guests are very happy, then you can overcharge €3.10 for shop items, and then there's still a 12.5% chance that they will buy it. Since they're constantly bumping into the stalls over and over again, this low chance is fine and eventually they'll buy it anyway. The base maximum price for a map is 70 cents, so we will charge €3.80. For cotton candy it's 60 cents when it's cold and 90 cents otherwise, and since with the warm climate it will very rarely be cold, we'll use the 90 cents as the base and charge $4. Similarly for the drink stall, which takes a few months to research, we will charge $4.30. The umbrella pricing is trickier. Guests will only ever buy it if it rains, as otherwise they will need to have ridden 3 rides first, but they will also immediately pay whatever when it rains. We could just charge $20, but then guests who spawn with 100 cannot afford it as they've already bought a map. And of course the food and drink also factors into the equation, they might have already bought that, so it's hard to know what's the best price. Ultimately, I decided to charge €16.20 to complement the map price after a test that showed that was more profitable than $20. Because we're charging so much for these stalls, it's now also profitable to run the ad for free park entry. It costs €50 a week or $200 a month to run that ad, and it spawns 50 guests per month on average, which is a cost of €4 per guest. If they just buy a map, which they will do, then they have already almost paid for themselves, and if they stay around and also buy food or even an umbrella, then it's pure profit. Oh, and actually the ads are even cheaper, as if you take out ads right after a weekend, you get almost an entire week for free, as it only starts counting down at the start of the next week. In the first 2 runs I did 12-week ad campaigns, so we paid for 12 and got 13, but this time I'm doing just 2-week ad campaigns, which gets us 3 weeks for the price of 2. That's a very significant difference, as we get an entire third of the ad time for free. When running all ads, this saves a very considerable €6,150 per year compared to doing 12-week campaigns. In order to keep guests around as long as possible, we need to distract them. If they haven't ridden a ride after a few minutes, they will want to go home, and since these guests won't ride a ride, that's a real issue. But if they can find a ride to head for, then they will head for that ride instead of leaving, so they get into this cycle of heading for one of these freefalls, not being able to find it and heading for it again, and that's very hard to escape. With all that explained, we can look at the actual run, and man, it goes so much better than before. In the first run we had 357,000 after the first year, in the second run that improved to 384,000, and in this third run that improved even more to a massive €422,000. And that's not even because we made more from the park entrance, that was already maxed out in the first run. It's possible that it's a little bit higher due to good spawning luck, but almost all the extra money comes from the stalls. The info kiosk has already made over €50,000 profit in this single year, and the cotton candy and drink stall together also have about 19,000. Because we have no space for a toilet in this setup, we cannot get the award for best toilets, meaning we need to reset to manipulate the award RNG a bit more frequently, but that's okay. We also don't qualify for the most dazzling color scheme award, but that's because we actually never qualified for it despite what I said earlier. During this third run I discovered that even though you cannot color mazes, they do have a track and therefore count for this award, and with our many mazes to increase the soft guest cap, we definitely don't have more than 50% of the tracked rides painted a dazzling color. I did kinda get carried away a bit with the RNGing though, as I also started to do that for rain. Rain is incredibly profitable as it sells umbrellas, but it doesn't rain very often in a warm climate. So I started fast forwarding for a few weeks, and if it didn't rain, I reloaded, built a ride to move along the random number generator and tried again, until I got the rain that I wanted. It's all a bit mad, but it does produce amazing results, and whereas it took us until June 4th year 3 in the first run and April 19th in the second run, this time we will nearly do it within just 2 years. Not quite though, and after selling our rides, except for the mazes as they don't return any money when sold, we get our bank account to $1 million on March 19th year 3. That's a whole 15% faster than the first attempt, and it really all is in the stalls. In the first run we made about €94,000 profit from stalls, while in this much better run we more than doubled that with 198,000. Of course, the park entrance still easily has the lead with 866,000, but making 19% of all the profit from stalls is no joke. It is definitely possible to do this faster still. More RNG manipulation for better timed rain and a bit more luck with faster guest spawning and more guests buying stuff can make it faster, and so can a lot of manual effort. You can probably make more money by individually changing the park entry price for every single guest. That way you can even make full price of the guests with a half entry voucher, as you can just temporarily change the price to double their spawning cash. And perhaps in the scenario with a cash machine you could force a lot more stall revenue out of the guests, although the richest guest in the scenario with a cash machine that charges park entry only have 65 to 95 euros instead of 80 to 110, so I don't actually think that will work. You'll lose a lot on the park entrance. Either way, all of these options ask beyond a reasonable effort, so it's time we move on to the even faster method, charging for rides. On the surface, this looks no more profitable than charging for the park entry, as you're sucking the guests dry either way, but it's the cash machine that makes this so much better. This was introduced in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, and it allows guests to get an extra 50 bucks once they run out of money, and they can do that an infinite amount of times. In pay-for-entry scenarios, this only allows them to buy more food and souvenirs and stuff, which isn't a very fast revenue source, but if you charge for the rides, then they keep going on rides for the same price they paid before, keeping the revenue exactly the same. And this makes truly a massive difference. The highest monthly park entrance profit we saw in any of the previous 3 runs was 59,120 euros in October year 1 of the 3rd run. That will be complete child's play for a paper ride scenario, and we will absolutely destroy that. The question now is, what is the most profitable ride design? The highest profit per hour can be found on big rides that guests are willing to pay the maximum of 20 bucks for, but these are not actually the most profitable in a larger context. To get to that high of a ticket price, the ride needs high stats, which means it needs to be long and big. And guests that are stuck on a long ride are not currently going on another ride, so you want to keep the ride time very short to maximize the amount of guests a ride can go on. When you think of short rides, you naturally think of the tiny maze, and my first instinct was to put a whole bunch of these mazes on a very long path, so that guests are in and out as fast as possible while paying more than 5 euros every time they enter a maze. However, there are several issues with this. This maze only has an intensity rating of 0.54, which means that half of your guests, the one that spawn with an intensity preference of 4 or more, will never ever go on it. This wouldn't be a problem in scenarios where guests prefer gentle rides, but the only one of those is Gentle Glen, and since that one is an RST1 scenario, there is no cash machine. We could also solve this problem by giving the maze 98 inaccessible tiles, which bumps the intensity up to a maximum of 2.5, but now it's very big and quite expensive. The size is an issue because not many parks are big and flat while also fulfilling the other requirements. There are only 8 scenarios that charge for the ride and have both the cash machine and maze unlocked from the start. The biggest and flattest of these is Bumbly Bazaar, but it's still not great with a fair few hills. And also, even though the guests who prefer more than 4 intensity will go on this if they're happy enough, it will not give them much happiness, which in combination with the overcrowding that we're probably gonna get, it's gonna require a few entertainers, which is expensive. That last word, expensive, is a problem anyway, since mazes do not return any money when sold, and building 40 of these big mazes already cost 100,000 euros, so that's no good either. Okay, no mazes then. The next best option is probably the humble micro corkscrew coaster. You can charge at least 9 euros and 60 cents for one of them, they are still very short and small, and most importantly they have an intensity rating of 4.3, which is a rating that every single guest can enjoy. Our list of valid scenarios is even sparser now though. The only 6 paper ride scenarios that start with both the cash machine and the corkscrew coaster are Infernal Views, Ayer's Adventure, Mirage Madness, Rainforest Romp, Sherwood Forest and Mythological Madness. Out of these, Sherwood Forest has my preference, since it's entirely flat, has very rich guests, so it'll be a bit of a while before they need the cash machine, and they also spawn with low hunger and thirst, allowing the guests to go on for longer without needing to pause for food. Alright, let's actually get going. Many of the fundamentals are the same as before. We want to constantly run all ad campaigns, with the only difference being that the free and half price park entry campaigns are not available, and we also want to qualify for as many awards as possible and get one every single month. The first thing that we need to do though, after setting up the ads, is get rid of everything that's already there and move all the guests to the few remaining path pieces. This takes a while to do since there's over 200 guests in the park, but we can do this while paused, so in terms of game time it's instant. Then it's time to start building up the lines of corkscrews. There is something a bit weird going on here, and that is that if you build them in one way they need to be 4 tiles apart, but if you build them in the opposite order suddenly the station tile does fit under the corkscrew and they can be only 3 tiles apart. That is better, as guests now have to walk shorter distances between the rides, allowing them to go on more rides. The way that the rows on opposite sides of the path are built is very important too. Guests like walking straight on if they can, and with this setup, if they do that after exiting a corkscrew, they will immediately walk into the queue line of another, shortening the time in between rides once again. And to prevent guests from walking into these exit paths, we'll place some no entry signs. After the first line of 4, I'm leaving a gap so that we can branch out later, and then it's time for 4 more. By abusing the pause button and only very briefly unpausing when we need to build something, we managed to remove everything and build 16 corkscrew coasters before March 1st has even ended. After having placed down some gentle and water rides to qualify for those awards, it's time for even more corkscrew coasters, and by the end of March we already have 41 of them. To illustrate how much time I spent paused in this month, a month is less than 7 minutes long, but it took me about 35 minutes to get through March. Usually, pay-per-ride parks are a bit slower to get going than pay-for-entry parks, but I was surprised to find that we already hit a profit of more than 40,000 euros in March, while we got always somewhere in the 30,000 in Adrenaline Heights. With this, we also beat Sherwood Forest in the first month with the most ridiculous margin ever. We got 44 times the goal of 1,000 euros of ride ticket profit. In April it rains, as it also did in March, but that's not a problem as the yellow roof pieces with massive holes in them make the corkscrews count as shelter, so rain has zero effect on our setup. After building some more corkscrews, I noticed that the number of guests are sick, so next to the many cash machines I also built some first aid rooms to help them get better sooner so that they can go on more rides again quicker. Oh, and whereas March is still in the same ballpark as the park entrance run, April definitely isn't, with a ride ticket profit of 76,000 euros, and this will only get crazier. By this time, some of the corkscrews could use an inspection to reduce the chance of a breakdown, but I'm not paying for mechanics, so I will hire a whole bunch of them to quickly inspect and fix any rides that need it, and then fire them again before the next payday. I also put down a bunch of info kiosks to sell people 20 euro umbrellas during the next train, because why not? The nice thing about pay-per-ride parks is that they keep scaling forever as long as you keep getting more guests, and after the 44,000 of March and the 76,000 of April, May already breaches the 100k barrier with 122,000, more than the previous 2 months combined. The growth doesn't stop there, and after building even more corkscrews, June is even better with 151,000 euros profit, and that with less than 1,700 guests in the park. It's truly insane how much ride ticket profit you can make. Each guest is spending nearly 100 euros a month on rides. At the end of July, we need to do something about our aging rides. After 5 months, any ride maximum ticket price goes down significantly, and all the corkscrews we built in March will turn 5 months old at the start of August. Therefore, we need to refurbish them. With the same pausing strategy, this can be done nearly instantly for the game, so even though rides do need to be closed before you can refurbish, it barely takes away any profit since they're closed for only such a brief amount of time. Also, there have been a few issues with guests crowding near the front of the park where the queue lines are full, despite it being very quiet in the back. I have tried to disperse the guests with some temporary no entry signs a few times, but it hasn't really worked out all that well. At the start of August, after refurbishing the rides, I got a different idea, which is to build 2 one-way paths from the very front that lead to the very back. The guests won't be able to ride anything while walking on this path, but I do believe that the better guest distribution will improve profit. And it looks like I was right, as while July was only slightly higher than June with 168,000 euros profit, August blew that out of the water with a massive 206,000. With this speed, we might even become a millionaire within 1 year. September brings more refurbishing and also of course all the other constant things, like hiring and firing mechanics and sometimes also additional handymen, and RNG manipulation to stay at the maximum of 4 awards. It's all worth it though, as we enter October with more than 900,000 euros in the bank, ensuring our victory before the year ends. We're even closer than you might think, as we can also sell the ride and path for quite a bit of money. After having fired the staff, we start deleting rides just before we hit 940,000 euros. With very careful timing, it works out perfectly, and after deleting the scenery and path, we hit a bank balance of just over 1 million euros on October 7th, year 1. That is a phenomenal run, and I honestly cannot believe just how fast it was. September has an insane ride ticket profit of 239,000, that's just madness. My favorite guest is guest 457. She is now stranded on the grass along with everyone else, but before I ruined their lives, this mad lass managed to spend €1,144.40 on 120 corkscrew coasters. Her favourite, before I deleted this, was corkscrew 93, a fine specimen, she has a good taste. To show how incredibly important cash machines are, we can look at how much money has walked through the park entrance. We have just under 4,000 admissions and guests on average carry €105 in this scenario, so a little over €400,000 has walked through this gate, which is only about a third of the total money that we made. Cash Machine 2 is the most popular with over 1,600 customers, which is over €80,000 extracted from just this one alone. Now, we could have definitely done it a bit faster. My setup could probably be more efficient and I could have built the 2 underground guest distributor paths earlier, but this playthrough was, despite it being only 7.5 months long, the longest of all runs in this video and I really cannot be bothered to do that again. So naturally, the morning after writing the previous sentence I did another attempt and beat the record. The setup is the exact same, but I built food stalls earlier, fitted in a few more corkscrews around the edges and built the 2 distributor paths much earlier so that I don't have to fiddle around with no entry signs. I also fired all the handymen every payday this time, except for one where I forgot, which saved me about €10,000 in staff wages over the run. That's not a very big difference, but it's a difference nonetheless. March is actually slightly less good this time with €41,000 instead of 44,000, which is probably due to randomness. April is already a lot better with 82,000 compared to 76,000 and May also has a few thousand more. It's not until June that the difference starts to become very noticeable, probably because this is when the distributor paths are really paying off. The first run had 151,000 ride ticket profit in June and the second run did 170,000. July is even more extreme with 168,000 originally and already 209,000 the second time around. This is not only because the guests are going on the rides more frequently, but they're also staying around longer due to less overcrowding and more food stalls. Overcrowding turned out to be a lot less of an issue than I expected and we didn't need any entertainers, but in the first run it was sometimes quite crowded near the entrance, which may have caused some guests to leave. At the end of July we have about 230 more guests in the park during the second run with about 2,130 versus just 1,900 in the first run. That's partly because about 90 more guests entered the park, which I guess is just good luck, but the other 140 extra guests is because they're staying around for longer. August goes even crazier with a massive €245,000 ride ticket profit and also an additional 8,000 from umbrellas when it started raining for the first time and I placed some temporary information kiosks. When September rolls around we are already nearly there and at the very end of the 18th of September I start deleting all the stalls and then the rides. After a couple of failed attempts I now do get the timing exactly right and on September 20th we delete the path and scenery and cross the threshold of €1 million. It may not seem that much of a difference, but that's about 8% faster than in the first run, which is not a small improvement. Originally I concluded the ride ticket part of this video here, but I just couldn't get the mazes out of my head and I needed to know what they are really capable of. Am I right to doubt them, or will they stand strong despite all the hurdles they face? There's only one way to find out and that is to try it. So what do we need for a maze run? Firstly, we need to make a maze that is intense enough for the guests that spawn with an intensity preference of 4 or more. With maximum happiness, guests are willing to go up to 2.55 points outside of their range, so it needs to have at least 1.45 intensity. To get a little bit of leeway I decided to make it 29 tiles long, which gives it 1.66 intensity, so they need to be very happy but don't quite need to be at their absolute maximum. I also put a bunch of flowers on it to increase the maximum ticket price from €6 to €6.60, increasing revenue by 10%. The only correct scenario choice out of the few scenarios with both the maze and cash machine immediately available is Bumbly Bazaar, since it's big enough and it's quite flat. After preparing it and relocating the guests, we start building. This park has 2 entrances, so my idea is to build on one side and put a no entry sign on the other side of the mazes to prevent people from leaving the maze area. This is going to require a fair bit of hill flattening, which is expensive, but is something we have to do. This run has a slower start than Sherwood Forest, as the rides are quite expensive to build at a little under €1,800 per maze, so we cannot build too many at the start. We also start with fewer guests, and a significant number of them already want to go home. On top of all of that comes the fact that half of the new guests have to walk all the way across the entire map, which takes too long, so I will just pick them up and place them down near the mazes so that they can go on the rides quicker. To make everyone as happy as possible as quickly as possible, I have hired many entertainers that I will briefly fire every payday to pay no staff wages. Between every 6 mazes we'll place a cash machine and a food stall to take care of the guests' needs, and with that the setup is entirely explained. One advantage of this setup is that we do not need any handyman or mechanics. Mazes cannot break down, and since they have 0 nausea there will also be no vomit. That doesn't really save on staff costs as we fire them every payday anyway, but it does save me a lot of effort. One downside of mazes is that they cannot be made sheltered, so any rain will ruin the run. Luckily, Bumbly Bazaar has the hot and dry climate, so if we get lucky with no rain in March, then the next opportunity for rain isn't until September, which is when we, if this strategy is any good, will already have almost won. There is also the happiness concern we discussed earlier, with overcrowding and half the guests wanting 4 or more intensity. I hope that the entertainers will fully solve this, but I'm not entirely sure, it's something we'll have to see. The biggest downside though is that mazes do not return any money when they're sold. We finished building the 72 mazes in April and they have cost us a little over 130,000 euros. In Sherwood Forest we spent less than that and also got 70% of it back at the end from selling the ride, but here that's not gonna happen. Therefore, in order to be competitive, the ride ticket income needs to be significantly higher than that of the corkscrew run. Despite the slower start, March is still on the same playing field with 42,000 euros, which is in between the 2 corkscrew runs. But then the incredible shortness of this ride goes into overdrive, and in April we already surpass 100,000 euros and make 23,000 more than in the best corkscrew run. May is even more extreme with 160,000 and June smashes that with 219,000 euros ride ticket profit. That is absolutely incredible, and the guests are going on so many rides. In just 4 months, half a year or probably a little less than that, guest 131 has already ridden a very nice 169 mazes and has spent over 1,000 euros doing so. The mazes all have a super high throughput and the highest reach over 4,000 guests per hour, nearly double that of the highest corkscrews. Cash Machine 1 beats all of them though, with 5,500 guests an hour. One downside of this setup is that some guests will not be able to find the exit when they want to go home. Yes, one of the 2 park exits is reachable, but they always want to go to the one that is closest by when they decide to go home, which could be the other one that has a no entry sign in the way. Therefore, I have to manually drop all the leaving guests off at that exit a few times to prevent the park rating from dropping. It doesn't negatively impact the run, but it does take time for me to do, making this run even longer. July continues to be crazy, with now 4 awards active and a total of 261,000 euros ride income, but a lower total profit than June as we have to refurbish a bunch of rides to keep the ticket price high. Well, the OpenRCT2 exclusive refurbish option does not exist for mazes, so we had to manually delete and rebuild them. That's not a problem time-wise, as we can just abuse the pause button as we've already done before, but since mazes do not give back any money, it does cost us another 55,000 euros to replace all the mazes that we built in March. That is worth it though, and in August we make an insane 305,000 euros profit from ride tickets, getting us quite close to the goal of 1 million. It is now time for the April mazes to be rebuilt, but I don't think that's worth the 77,000 euros. Instead, I will just lower the prices of those from 6.6 euros to the new maximum of 3.6, which I think loses us less money. And now it's just a waiting game to see whether we actually beat the record of September 20th that I set with the corkscrews. The monthly profit will be lower now, but we also only need another 140,000 euros or so. It's gonna be very close. After a bit of nail biting, it turns out that we do beat it as we reached the goal of 1 million euros on September 16th, 4 days faster than the corkscrews. That just shows how incredibly overpowered mazes are for making quick money, as despite the roughly 185,000 construction costs, it still won. If they did give back money, then we would have gotten back about 130,000 of that, putting the completion date on one of the first days of September. Because the runs finished so close together, only 4 days apart, I don't think there's a clear winner. My fastest run is with the maze, but if someone optimized their corkscrew run just slightly, that could take back the title. If there was a scenario with the maze, the cash machine and a more gentle intensity preference for all of the guests, so if Gentle Glenn had the cash machine, then the maze would have easily won, as then we would not have needed to make them so big and expensive. One thing that is clear is that the faster a run is, the more complicated it is and the more time it takes to perform. The Katie's Dreamland 451 year run was just 37 minutes of fast forwarding, while the Bumbly Bazaar 6.5 month run took nearly 3 hours of constant pausing, clicking, checking things, reloading for RNG manipulation and more. And yet, that will soon seem not very long at all, because once again, we're not done. While recording this shot of guest 131 from just a minute ago, I noticed that sometimes they would just walk around and not go on any maze for quite a while. Sure, there's a chance that they will immediately go on the same ride again or go on the one across the street, but that's not guaranteed. And once they're on the path, they have a 75% chance of walking straight on at every junction, so it could take a good number of mazes before they try to go on another one. My first idea to remedy this was a circle of 2 mazes where guests are guaranteed to walk into the next one. They need to be a bit bigger than this for the more thrill-seeking guests, and they need to be cash machines for when guests become broke, but with that you get to this setup. Guests now do have a chance to walk into the cash machine instead of the next maze, but with the no entry sign blocking the maze exit, they will go to the entrance right after hitting the cash machine anyway, so that's fine. In the run we just did, I used fences to prevent a path connection instead, but it works the same as no entry sign. There is a problem with this setup though, and we can see that by dropping 10 guests in it for a little test. Some guests will go on the maze just fine, but others keep walking back and forth between the cash machine and the maze without ever going on it. That's not because they don't want to ride it, but rather because they are still on the same path tile, which ruins everything here. Take this tiny setup. Here we have a broke guest that first walks into the cash machine, gets 50 bucks and then goes on the maze she can now afford. We'll do this again, but we'll now drop her facing the other direction. The maze is too expensive, so that's not gonna happen. After realizing that, she turns around and gets some cash. But after that, despite now being able to afford it, she refuses to ride the maze, and that is because she is still on the same path tile. If we instead put 2 path pieces in between, then she will still refuse it the first time for some reason, but will ride it the second time. A different ride is also no problem, as demonstrated here by using no entry signs to force her to go on the other maze after hitting the ATM. To solve this problem, I came up with this setup of 2 mazes opposite each other. Guests will exit one of the mazes and already have a chance to hit the cash machine. Whether they do that or not, after that they will walk onto the other path tile, have a large chance to hit the other cash machine and then have the choice of 2 maze entrances. This makes sure that the guests cannot get stuck not wanting to go on a ride. And since guests prefer to walk straight on, they first are likely to run into the cash machine and after that they are likely to walk back and forth between the 2 maze entrances. That is important as there will be quite a few guests in every module, so guests will quite frequently get rejected from entering because another guest is also entering the maze at this very moment. With this setup there is minimal time between that and the next chance to go on one. The ATM next to the exits does mean that guests sometimes take longer to get back to the entrances, but it also reduces the chance that guests want to go home. If they have less than 5 euros on them while they are walking around, they have a chance to want to leave, so the sooner they get more cash, the lower that chance. These mazes are also slightly bigger than the previous ones, and they hit the maximum intensity of 2.5. This allows us to charge 6 euros and 80 cents instead of 6.60, which is nice, but the real reason for this is that it allows the 4 or more intensity crowd to go on them immediately. Those guests need to have at least 150 happiness to ride this, and in Bumbly Bazaar guests spawn with between 135 and 166 happiness. That is not always enough, but if we place an info kiosk directly next to the park entrance, then they will all buy a map and gain an additional 32 happiness from that, bringing everyone in the range to ride these mazes. That is great, because we now no longer have to wait for entertainers to increase the happiness, which takes a while. So far the rule has been that the better the setup is, the more complicated it is and the longer it takes to do, and that's no exception here. As usual, we start by removing everything, relocating the guests and running all ads. Now we have 2 park entrances with an info kiosk and a bunch of hyper-optimized maze modules, but the guests cannot get there. There is really only one option to do this quickly and efficiently, and that is for me to pick up all the guests one by one and manually put them in the correct module. While reviewing the final entrance fee run, I said that this would be an unreasonable amount of effort, but unfortunately for me, we're doing this anyway. To keep track of how many guests are in each module, I will move 10 guests at a time. And this is my life now. First I wait until there are 10 new guests, then I make sure they all have gotten a map, then I drop them into the correct module before doing the entire thing again and again and again and again. And really, that's kind of it. There's nothing more to it, outside of the standard stuff like keeping the ads going and RNGing for rewards. One thing that I do not need to concern myself with this time is firing the staff every payday, since we don't have any staff. Mechanics and handymen are still not necessary, and this setup also doesn't require any entertainers. Of course, the fewer guests there are per module, the more efficient they will be, so at first I'm keeping it relatively low at 30 guests per module. Later that will become more, as at some point the cost of a new module is bigger than the income loss from inefficiency from a few more guests in an existing module. At the end of March we have 12 modules and are still broke because we've spent every single penny we have on these mazes. The ride income is a bit disappointing too. It is the highest we've seen for March so far, but it's only a few thousand more than in the previous run, which doesn't bode particularly well. Nevertheless, we continue our effort, and that effort is huge. In the corkscrew run, I complained that it took me 35 minutes to get through March, but that is nothing compared to the 1 hour and 20 minutes it took here. Relocating all the guests while being careful to make no mistakes takes absolutely forever to do, and that is what we will continue doing in April. Even though the chance that any guests want to go home is quite small, it is not zero, so every now and then we have to remove those guests, and to keep everything efficient and balanced, I am also replacing those guests with a new one. Despite getting more guests in April than March, I do get through it slightly faster with only 1 hour of gameplay. We now have 20 modules with each 40 guests, except the newest one, as I couldn't quite do that in time before the end of April, and we do need a bit of wiggle room to reset and alter the random number to make sure we get an award. It's kind of mesmerizing to look at these modules with see-through rides enabled. The guests are like ants in the way they constantly move through the mazes. In the first run, I expressed concern about the more thrill-seeking guests getting unhappy from riding these mazes, but that's actually not a problem at all. Because their current happiness is very high, even the most extreme guest with 4 or more intensity preference and a high nausea tolerance still gets 35 happiness from just the stats. The high ride ticket price does subtract 30 from that, but the 0 queue time and having ridden it before adds back 30, so every time they ride the maze they gain 35 happiness. That is also more than enough to offset the few points of happiness reduction they get every time they enter the tile with the maze entrances, because there's a lot of guests there. Okay, now comes the moment of truth. Was the low profit in March a sign that this run isn't as good as I expect it to be, or will April deliver and be completely insane? It turns out it's the second option, and we had nothing to worry about. Whereas the first maze run had 105,000 ride ticket profit in April, this second run is nearly 50% more with a massive 153,000. Yeah, this is gonna be good. May takes a bit longer again at 1 hour and 10 minutes, which is because thanks to the second award we now get more guests. Currently we're at 50 guests per module and are nearly done building new modules. When I was adding another 10 extra guests to every module, I kept track of where I was by painting the no entry signs of the ones I had done blue. With 25 modules with 50 guests each, there should be 1250 guests in total, but there's actually 1252. It seems that I have added 1 extra guest to 2 modules without realizing, but being only 2 guests off without a way to properly count them is not bad if you ask me. This setup scales even better than the previous run, as while there May was 52% more profitable than April, this time it's about 79% more profitable. Our ride ticket profit in May is an insane 274,000 euros, and it's only the 3rd month. In June we built our final module, number 28. We're making so much money that it cannot be too much longer to €1 million, and I think that we're roughly at the point where the €6,500 cost of a new module is too much and won't be earned back in time. We can't be absolutely sure of that as I haven't done any tests, but it will have to do as I really don't want to do this multiple times. One thing that happened during June that I forgot about is that the first guest started to lose energy from being too hungry. I was hoping that we would beat this before it would become a problem, but I completely forgot to actually check for that, so in addition to guests wanting to go home from being broke, there will also be a bunch that are tired. And even if they don't want to go home yet, it's still bad as tired guests walk slower and thus go on fewer rides. Although if they have food they also walk slower, and I don't really know where to put the food stall, so maybe this is still the best option. At the end of June, which is halfway the first year, we can do a few comparisons with the previous run. In the first run we had guest 131 who had ridden 169 rides, but now we have guest 163 who has gone on 184 rides. That's not actually that much more, which is probably caused by there being a lot of guests per module. They are more consistent though, and there are fewer guests that have a really low ride count. But the biggest advantage of this setup is that only very few guests are wanting to go home. The first maze run had 1905 admissions in the first 4 months, but only 1250 of them stuck around. The second run has slightly more admissions with 1935, but nearly all of them have stuck, with 1755 guests still in the park. The extra cash machines are really paying off here by preventing guests from being broke for too long. And you can see that in the throughput of the mazes. In the first run we had a bunch around 4,500 with one above 5,000, while here that's nearly doubled, with a few reaching above 8,000 guests an hour. Of course this is reflected in the ride ticket profit too, as we go from 274,000 to a completely insane 393,000 euros ride ticket profit. Keep in mind that in the previous run we hit 305,000 in August, and now we are reaching 393,000 2 months earlier in June. With about 680,000 euros in the bank, it's clear that we will reach the goal next month. This is very nice because that means that we'll get there before any rides lower in value, so we don't have to refurbish any or lower them in price, saving us quite a bit of money, allowing us to beat it even faster. On July 11th we have 830,000, and I am tired of picking up and relocating guests, and so is my right arm, so I'm just gonna sit back and enjoy the ride from now on. 170,000 euros seems like a lot of money, and it is, but at this tempo it won't be too much longer before we hit the goal. And indeed, soon after, on the 23rd of July, we passed that magical threshold of 1 million euros, nearly 2 entire months faster than in the first maze run, proving once and for all that mazes are the most profitable ride in the game, as long as you're willing to put in over 5 hours of your time to play through less than 35 minutes of unpaused game time. It could maybe have been even faster if I built more modules and had fewer guests per module, but I seriously think that doing another one of these runs is not good for my wrist, so this time it really is the end. Well, the end of the ride ticket section anyway, because while 4 3/4 months is the fastest I've been able to get 1 million euros so far, we haven't abused any exploits yet. Yes, these optimizations have been kind of exploity and definitely extremely cheesy, but it's still a combination of intended behaviors. That is very different from bugs and glitches that were never meant to be in the game in the first place. In the original disc version of RCT2 you could get a lot of free money by building rides inside scenery, as demonstrated here in an old YouTube video by the shoulder buttons. The problem is this got fixed in later releases of the game, and it doesn't work anymore in the triple thrill pack version that I have. However, there is a trick that still works, which I learned about from a commenter on a video a little over a year ago. If I place this coaster piece on this tower of land, it costs me 34 euros. But when I sell it after lowering the land under it 2 units, I get 38 euros back, which is the full price I paid plus the support costs for the now existing supports. With just one track piece this is not profitable, as lowering the land is too expensive, but if you have many track pieces above each other then you can turn a profit, as all the pieces gain a little bit of extra selling price from the supports. Doing it like this, one tile at a time, is way too slow and cumbersome, so when I abused this exploit last year I designed this extremely dense wooden coaster. Just plop it down, lower the land under it as much as possible and sell it for tons and tons of profit. The question now is, which scenario is the best for this? We need a high starting capital, as this coaster costs over 120,000 euros to build, and ideally also a bunch of hills to lower. You can still make a profit if you also have to raise the land first, but it's obviously much better if you don't need to pay the money to raise the land. Six Flags Magic Mountain is the best for this. Out of all the scenarios that don't have money disabled, it has the highest amount of value stored in the rides and scenery with 181,000 euros. It also has an additional 150,000 euro extra loan available, which could come in handy. After deleting all the rides, it's time to start making money. We abuse the pause button as much as possible, but while lowering the land we do need to turn it off, allowing time to pass. Still though, this is effective enough that after paying back the loan, we reached the €1 million mark a few game ticks before the end of March 2nd. Yeah, we just became a millionaire in a mere 2 days time. It's not good enough though, and the second attempt is already better. I realized that it's a waste of time to sell all the little rides and the stalls, so I only sold the big ones to get the money and got to lowering the land quicker. And we do finish earlier in day 2, but it's still day 2 and not day 1. Almost all the game time is now spent lowering the round, so we need to reduce that, which we can do with a hyper twister coaster. The reason I picked the wooden coaster for this is that it's got a decently high support limit and the most expensive ride supports in the game, with €3.5 per unit per tile. The Hyper Twister has cheaper supports with just €2.5, but its significantly higher support limit still makes it more profitable. The insane price of €341,000 for this design is too much to start with, so the wooden variant is still useful, but as soon as we can, we switch to the Hyper. This really speeds it up a lot. In fact, it's so good that we actually do manage to get to €1 million before the first day is over. You can obviously still do it faster if you go measuring by amount of game ticks, but for me, seeing March 1st and over €1 million at the same time is good enough. So, how fast can you become a millionaire in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2? Without doing anything, my record is 451 years. From the park entrance fee it's a little over 2 years, from ride tickets it's 4.75 months, and by abusing exploits I managed to get there in under a single day. To learn more about making money in RollerCoaster Tycoon, click right here. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.